Bitcoin will surpass gold in the long run. A massive Bitcoin clip from an interview on ARD that's really taking off right now. Check this out on ARD public television. They're talking about Bitcoin prices of $600,000. And more dollars are being talked about. The reporter keeps trying to throw Bitcoin expert Philipp Mattheis off his game here, and to attack him here. But he doesn't let that get to him and stays really cool. The reporter was actually shocked here. When she heard the expert talking about it, she said there's no chance that Bitcoin will surpass gold here, but it's fact. And she didn't like that at all. But then he went into it. Why Bitcoin has to prevail here. Why Bitcoin is valuable. Why Bitcoin can't be compared to other assets. And why its price will continue to rise. And much more. The clip is truly unmatched in its intensity. This is the first time I've seen such a bullish Bitcoin expert on ARD. I'm really very, very positively surprised. I'm going to show you the full clip now, and at the end, I'll give you a little assessment.
And yeah, especially if it should ever drop. There's always a lot of speculation involved in the price of a piece of art. Art has something in common with another object that we want to take a closer look at. With Bitcoin, actually, last year it reached the 1,000,000 mark for the first time. Dollar broken through. That attracts a lot of speculators and also stirs up a lot of emotions. To bring a bit of clarity to the matter. For that, I've invited someone who has been critically examining the phenomenon of Bitcoin for years. The journalist and author, Philipp Mattheis. Good morning to Munich.
Hello, I greet you.
Mr. Mattheis, if we really compare Bitcoin to the comedy artwork with the banana by Maurizio Catalan, the banana is actually only worth 35 cents. If Bitcoin were, it would also be, well, briefly interesting to think about. Between 35 cents and 6 million.
Well, in principle, Bitcoin would be like a scope. No, so it's now 2009. And now we're at the final question. We talked about the 100,000 questions. Now we have, to a large extent, psychological mechanisms at play, namely supply and demand, that I have there with the art community. I think what's also very important is to determine the value, is that we shouldn't just focus on the question. Explaining Bitcoin is a rarity. I think that's what the invention of Birgit Schillenheimer Mabus has also achieved. It has been successful in creating scarcity in the digital realm, an artwork that can't be reproduced forever. If it weren't reproducible, then it wouldn't be so high. And for me, it's especially that the supply is capped at 21 million. And that's basically a justification and 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 justification. More has appeared than ultimately the big increase.
Absolutely right, it's explained, and it's totally crazy to see such statements here on ARD. But you have to add that it's not just the scarcity. There are also a ton of properties like divisibility, portability. You can't just transport a piece of art easily or divide it up and so on, because before that, a banana was presented. So a banana as a piece of art and stuff, and now you're kind of comparing here. In the next step of this playback here from ARD, then Bitcoin with a banana or something with a piece of art, of course, Bitcoin has many, many more advantages. But you also have to point out, in the end, this is always subjective. And the reporter doesn't really seem to believe it here. What you're saying here, that the scarcity of Bitcoin is something really, really special and so on. And that's basically what I want to say. Is it subjective? Some people get what Bitcoin means. Some people just don't get it, and then they say, okay, for me, it's useless. Because I can't see the value. That's totally legitimate. Anyone can basically define their own value here for themselves. In the end, value is always subjective. Everyone assigns a value to things based on their own assessment, according to their level of knowledge, and so on. But let's keep going, because now it's really getting interesting. Crazy.
Now, the pure limitation of the supply, that's actually been the argument from the very beginning. When you make the comparison to currencies that are inflationary when states might print money without any substance behind it, that's always been the argument that this limitation on the supply basically serves to preserve value. But what is it really? What the value of Bitcoin actually is?
There's nothing behind it. Well, there's energy behind it. So it costs a lot to mine a Bitcoin. Costs a lot more electricity and also money. Can we say that there are certain connection costs? You can think of it a bit like this, that it's fully tied to our monetary and quality activity from the 2,600-year crisis. Cost. Something for gold mining, energy from our backs to protect us. There's a special way for us to protect ourselves. I'm at 1500, but it's really hard. I can't take my clothes off. I can't take my clothes off. I can't take my clothes off. It's similar, it's regulated through the hash rate, through the algorithm. You definitely have that in 2001. I can't take my clothes off. Of course, it's a problem. It also works that way. Of course, there's a lot of psychology involved too, so if no one wanted to have Bitcoin, then it wouldn't matter how high the acquisition costs were. Then many of my experts would probably say it's not worth hitting that. That's an important problem. And if I can understand it that way, it would have never been so crazy. That I don't really understand it that well. Namely, after 2009, after the big financial crisis.
I just need to interrupt here for a second, because that's something a lot of people always misunderstand. Bitcoin isn't backed by energy. Rather, Bitcoin is secured by energy. That means the energy in the Bitcoin network, the hash rate, the computing power is ultimately there to secure the Bitcoin network. And so he says here very, very correctly that you just can't create Bitcoin out of thin air. Like our fiat money, like our paper money. And that's why fiat money is worthless in the long run. Will always go to zero. It will always crash again sooner or later, because someday the money monopoly is exploited to create so much fiat money that later on the money can't buy anything anymore. Then there are still the banknotes, but they have no purchasing power anymore. And that's exactly what is prevented here with Bitcoin. And now he's talking about the price rally of Bitcoin. One, why Bitcoin is rising. Talks about global liquidity. But take a look at
Bitcoin would have never been so successful if, at the same time after 2009, after the big financial crisis, the global money supply had risen so sharply. And you can see that really well in the charts. So Bitcoin is very closely correlated with with the global money supply, and it really just shows what we rarely notice about inflation in our daily lives. We saw that in 2022, 2023, it was a year where every citizen really felt it in their daily lives. Prices have gone up, and that always has to do with the fact that the money supply in the system has grown. That is the goal. Stock prices and real estate have been noted. Rare things increase in value, right? Bitcoin has become a new indicator for that. It shows how much the money supply has grown. It's like a fear currency. The liquidity has grown significantly.
So it's basically something like a fear currency. Like gold. Maybe it's also used by some as a crisis currency.
Yeah, that's right. The big bet on Bitcoin is that it really becomes digital gold. That it can replace gold as the ultimate store of value, as a safe haven. But we have to be clear that we're not there yet. Bitcoin is still too volatile for that. But the big bet is that Bitcoin could really soon have national Bitcoin reserves, like what Donald Trump is planning. Then we might actually get to a point where Bitcoin replaces gold and becomes a stable last bastion of value in a system of fiat currencies that are constantly losing value and increasing in supply.
You're presenting that as a fact. So I would definitely bring that up. The central bankers, the ECB, the Bundesbank are warning that basically Bitcoin is nothing but hot air.
So you can clearly see here that the presenter from the news, not from the TREZOR, but here at ARD, is not really bullish on Bitcoin. She's clearly trying to frame Bitcoin negatively. Now, of course, something is being attacked here. That's fine too. You can do that. He answers really, really well here afterward. And she was really shocked here that this is being presented as a fact, that Bitcoin will eventually surpass gold here sooner or later. And I also think that it's definitely more than just speculation. I think a lot of people are really sure about this, that Bitcoin will surpass gold because it simply has many more positive qualities compared to gold. The scarcer, better verifiable, easier to share, better divisible, and easier to transport. Gold isn't digital. Gold is basically an old school commodity. Bitcoin is the first digital commodity. That means Whenever we've seen something get digitized, from the physical world into the digital, we've seen a price escalation, a value escalation happening. What similar thing could happen with Bitcoin? And a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts are really confident about that. What similar thing could happen with Bitcoin? And a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts are really confident about that. Maybe it's not even about that anymore, about speculation, but rather about being able to recognize something, what other people still don't recognize. And now take a look at his answer, because here he explains exactly why Bitcoin is superior to gold. But also goes even further here. We'll really pick up speed.
The ECB, the Bundesbank, they're warning that basically Bitcoin. So it's actually not even referred to as a currency.
That comes from the loss of significance, because Bitcoin takes away. The central banks have the power to create the illusion that the euro or the US dollar can be stable. Bitcoin, just like gold, clearly shows everyone that the money supply is growing. Central banks devalue their own currency by putting more money into circulation. The citizen notices it eventually through inflation. Gold and Bitcoin are kind of like a benchmark. That's why you don't go out, but rather let that happen.
So a lot of people get riled up even when you say something critical. For example, the bankers were also heavily criticized because they are pursuing their own interests, as you just described. On the other hand, these are exactly the people who react so emotionally. They also have their own interests. They want to sell Bitcoin through ETFs.
It's true that the ECB has already released several papers on this. Like, for example, that Bitcoin will fade into irrelevance, that it will lead to social unrest. Then there are the constant critics like Einzeler and Jürgen Schaaf, who keep stirring up negativity against Bitcoin all the time. It's the same on the Fed side. If you look at America, they're hitting hard too. They put out papers against Bitcoin, coming up with all these weird formulas, trying to derive something. Why Bitcoin is worthless, why it's a danger to society, and so on and so forth. That means the way the speaker presents it here is really not. The ECB is really going after Bitcoin. Even Christine Lagarde, when she's asked about Bitcoin, she just doesn't answer the question. In the end, it's the other way around. It's not that. Bitcoin is going after the ECB first, but the ECB is throwing out all these anti-Bitcoin papers out. It's not like Bitcoin is putting out any anti-ECB papers or anything like that. As a Bitcoin enthusiast, you know that Bitcoin is definitely making its mark here. And the euro is basically an inferior store of value. And accordingly, you really have to add that as a supplement, that the ECB folks are really going after Bitcoin hard, which is also understandable. Because here, Bitcoin is basically a direct, I don't know if you can call it an attack, but Bitcoin is basically an almost existentially destructive tool that could, in the long run, make the euro, the dollar, maybe even in the worst case, obsolete, or at least force you to get smart about it. Like, for example, in the USA, as it's currently planned. With a currency reserve and stuff like that, they're basically using Bitcoin to further strengthen the dollar, to partially back the dollar, and stories like that. But now here's the explosive answer to the reporter's attacks.
I've been completely against the establishment, against the big banks, against politics for the last 15 years, always speaking out. Standing strong, and in a way, we've made our mark. So I would say that the big narrative power was more on the side of politics and the big banks. Bitcoin has now managed to become, so to speak, really interesting for central banks. That is a very fascinating and truly unique story in financial history.
A quick question, because we're almost at 2001, to the end of the broadcast time. There are just a few questions left, because they also target gold with gold. If it replaces gold, would your prediction then be that gold would lose value accordingly?
I would first say that Bitcoin definitely wins against gold. You can actually calculate it pretty well. Yeah, so the market capitalization of Bitcoin is currently around 1.8 trillion, while gold's is at 12 trillion, so that's about a factor of 5. In fact, we would probably end up with a price of around dollars. Whether that really happens, I don't know either, but that a bit of the speculation idea that's currently out there.
I don't think we've ever seen a higher Bitcoin price prediction in the public broadcasting media. Like now here, the 600,000 US dollars. But he's actually still on the conservative side because the market cap for gold is, now it's already at around 18 trillion, so 18 billion. If Bitcoin aligns with gold, its price could be around $750,000, not $600,000, up to $850,000. Additionally, until Bitcoin connects with gold, gold will probably keep rising too. That means until Bitcoin eventually surpasses gold, it could also be. Bitcoin is already well over 1 million here because the market cap of gold keeps rising. Because we have central banks that are printing money. Of course, people will also flee to gold. They're fleeing to Bitcoin. That means liquidity is driving all assets up. But Bitcoin is very likely to rise faster than gold or other assets.
Bitcoin is I'm an optimist, but still, yes, it is. The foot rally of Bitcoin hasn't been determined. There's a lot of uncertainty. That was Philipp Mattheis. Thank you very much for being on our show. Yeah. Let's move from one uncertain topic to another, the statutory pension.
Did you guys hear that? From one uncertain topic, we move to the next uncertain topic. The pension is just as uncertain as Bitcoin. So I don't know where they got that comparison from, but that's just here, the ultimate hammer. And that's just not true at all. You can see that too, how it's framed in the media, how they're basically trying to push Bitcoin into a corner. They're also saying, yeah, the price rally isn't guaranteed. Of course, it's not guaranteed. But here, Philipp Mattheis is making the bullish case. Why Bitcoin has the potential to rise in the long term. And then they're basically comparing Bitcoin to the state pension. You absolutely can't compare that. The state pension is an absolute Ponzi scheme where new contributors have to keep coming in, and then the demographics are bad. Then the whole system doesn't work. At some point, that thing is going to collapse. It only works as long as the demographics are somewhat okay. And that's a really, really nasty comparison. So first they compare Bitcoin to a banana to some kind of trick. They actually did that here before. In the segment, I'm putting the whole segment down here. You can also see the beginning part here where it's basically about art, like a banana and stuff. And then you drink here, Bitcoin. They reference it to a banana. And now they're also referencing Bitcoin to the pension system and saying that Bitcoin is just as uncertain. So I don't know where this uncertainty is coming from. I'm going to show you this awesome beach now. From El Salvador, I'm sending you a lot of sunshine to Germany, Europe, or wherever you are. If the sun isn't shining where you are, then I'll at least send you some sunshine here. Let's say digitally. So I found it really interesting. Here's this clip. Let me know in the comments what you think about Philipp Mattheis, what you think about the news segment. I always say to Gesture about the ARD presenter, what you think, whether you like the segment. If you didn't like it that much, what do you think about the framing? Do you agree with it? The Bitcoin. Something like a Ponzi scheme is also like the pension system. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. Here you can easily and safely buy Bitcoin. With the code Bitcoin, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And if you want to secure your Bitcoin as much as possible, I'll put a link down below. Also, I'll throw in a link to a TREZOR hardware wallet so you can easily store your Bitcoin without any third-party risk on one of the safest hardware wallets on the market. You can store it, there's no third-party risk, you don't have to trust any exchange, you don't have to trust any ETF, it's an absolute recommendation. Here you can also get a discount with the code Bitcoin Hotel. Let me know what you think about this massive clip here from ARD. See you later. Peace out.